Good evening. For those of you in the audience and those of you at home, welcome to our second presentation for our mental health wellness speaker series. Last speaker was Dr. Moore, who gave us a wonderful oversight of some strategies that we can use as parents inside our home. Please know that if you would like to see that presentation, because maybe you weren't able to make it, you can get it on our district website under the health and wellness page. Also, it was attached to Dr. Millar's flyer that went out for today. This evening, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Millar speak to us about anxiety and how to deal with it at home. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Millar.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know our evenings are so precious when we have kids at home and trying to get homework done and everything that happens. So I really appreciate your time and for spending this evening with us. So I'm Dr. Millar. I work for Rutgers UBHC. I'm a program manager overseeing school-based programs. So what that means is we contract directly with school systems to provide services to students. So I get to work with a lot of adolescents. In addition to that, I'm also in private practice where I predominantly work with children and adolescents. So they're definitely my passion. It's the population that I enjoy working with the most. So our goal for today is really to be able to provide families with some strategies that they can use to support their students. Sorry about that. Is that better? Strategies to be able to support their children in the home, especially when they're noticing that their children are experiencing stress, anxiety. By the end of this presentation, the hope is that you'll understand the difference between stress and anxiety, be able to identify strategies to be able to support not only your children, but also ourselves, because it's really important that we identify how we're feeling and be able to use some skills to be able to support ourselves as well. All right, so let's just do a quick check-in. How are we feeling today? It's 7 o'clock on a Thursday night. It's been a long week. How are we feeling? What's happening in our bodies? What's going on emotionally? So this is one of the strategies that I love using with adults and with kids. I use it for myself as well, kind of just doing a quick check-in. Where am I at? So this is called the scale of emotional intensity, and it allows us to kind of check in with ourselves. Where's our intensity at? How are we feeling today? So if I'm in the blue zone, that means that I'm feeling like I'm regulated, my emotional intensity is in a manageable place. If I'm in the yellow zone, that's when I notice that I'm starting to get a little bit more escalated. I'm noticing that my intensity is increasing. And if I'm in the red zone, that's when I know my intensity is feeling a bit high. So especially for some of our kids, if we notice that they're waking up and they're already at a 3 or a 4, if they're feeling that stress, if they're feeling that anxiety and they're already at a 3 or 4, or if we notice ourselves waking up and we're already kind of in that place, if we take a look, it doesn't take that much to go from a 4 to a 5, right? And then we're in the yellow zone. Or if we're at that 5, it doesn't take much to go from that 5 to that 7. So being aware of our intensity and where we're at can really help us figure out how do I best regulate. And throughout today, we're going to be talking about different strategies and skills that we can use. So what is stress? Stress is an uncomfortable emotional experience accompanied by predictable biochemical, physiological, and behavioral changes. So what does that mean? It means that stress not only impacts us physically, but it impacts us physiologically. So it starts to impact things within our bodies. It starts to impact us emotionally. So stress can be good. It can be helpful. It can push us and help drive us to work harder, accomplish more. But if our stress becomes too much, then it really starts to impact us in some negative ways. Also, stress is individualized, right? So for some people, we're going to experience stress very differently than others. And there's a lot of symptoms that we may experience when we're feeling stressed. And the more that we understand our own stress and how it affects our bodies, the more we can catch it and learn how to manage it. Ooh, this is very sensitive. So these are some of the symptoms of prolonged stress. So if you think about when our body goes into stress mode, what we're feeling is it's almost like our body goes into this fight or flight mode. And if we're in that fight or flight mode, what our body is doing is really trying to conserve energy in the middle parts of our body and really focusing on our external, our limbs, right? So if I'm fighting, I'm going to need my arms. If I'm fleeing, I'm going to need my legs. So even though stress doesn't always mean danger, our body still kind of has that physiological response to it. So if our body responds in that way, that's why we tend to feel a lot of physical symptoms to our stress. So we can see in that middle section, it can create fatigue, problems with sleep. It can impact our digestive system. It can affect our immune system, because those middle parts of our body that are affected by those things are not the priority in those moments. It can also impact us emotionally. So loss of motivation, we might feel more anxious, we might feel more sad. We might feel that mood instability, we might feel more irritability. So there's a lot of different ways that that stress can impact us. Behaviorally, we tend to see social withdrawal. Sometimes there's those physical things like nail biting. We might overeat, undereat. So those are some of the physical symptoms that we might, the behavioral symptoms that we might see when we're stressed. And since we said stress is a very individual experience, the way we experience it is going to look different depending on who we are. So being able to recognize, where do I hold my stress? So I know for me, I tend to hold it in my shoulders and I tend to hold it in my stomach. So I know that for me, that's where I'm going to feel it. So when I notice that, that's when I say, okay, I'm feeling stressed. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. Where's my intensity at? I do that quick check and then I figure out what are the skills that I need to use to be able to support myself. So these are just some ways. I love this visual. I think it gives us a nice picture of what are some ways that stress can affect my body. Do I feel it in my head? Is it creating headaches? Is it creating tension in my jaw? Am I feeling it in my shoulders? Am I feeling that stiffness? And if I can understand what these physical symptoms mean, then I catch it. I know that this is what's happening, and then I can intervene more quickly. All right. So stress versus anxiety. So we said stress is a normal response, and stress tends to be temporary. When it's prolonged, that's when stress can become more of a concern. That's when stress can turn into anxiety. So when it becomes anxiety, that's when we really want to pay attention, more attention to it, and make sure that we're doing something to support ourselves and our children. So just to give you the criteria for anxiety, so anxiety is excessive anxiety and worry. So to get a diagnosis of generalized anxiety, let me start by saying it that way. It means that we're having excessive anxiety or worry that lasts for 6 months. It starts to impact us in multiple settings. It's going to impact our ability to control that worry. So this is something where, despite my best efforts, I'm having a harder time controlling the worry. And if we see here, the diagnosis requires feeling anxiety and worry that's associated with 3 of these symptoms. So it could be restlessness, being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, and sleep disturbance. Now, if you notice, for children, they only need 1 of these symptoms. So if they're feeling excessive anxiety or worry for 6 months, they're having difficulty controlling that worry, and they're experiencing 1 of these symptoms, then anxiety may be the concern. So the other piece is to recognize that anxiety is now impacting them in different settings. So it may impact them socially, it may impact them in school. It might present in lots of different ways. Maybe they're having a hard time separating from home. Maybe they're having a hard time coming to school. So how are they experiencing that anxiety? What are some of the symptoms that they're describing? And sometimes it's hard for them to verbalize it, but you notice some of those behavioral changes, which can really be a helpful trigger for us as parents. And we want to make sure that it's not better explained by drug use or medical concerns. So it's important to note that anxiety disorders are the most common group of illnesses within children and adolescents. The estimated lifetime prevalence of anxiety disorders in adolescents is about 15 to 20%. So I also want to note that the current data is not even out there. So everything that's happened in this world within the past 2 years isn't even indicated with this data. So from what we've seen in the schools, from what we've seen in private practice, we can see that these numbers may be increasing. We're definitely seeing a lot more anxiety. We as adults are struggling, so our kids are struggling. It's been prolonged. And I think sometimes we hear like post-pandemic, but the truth is we're still living in this, right? It's still affecting us in a lot of different ways on a daily basis. Just the fact that we're in this room wearing masks today just kind of proves that. So it's important to note that even these numbers may already seem kind of high, but the truth is that we're probably looking at something that's even more elevated. So at any given time, anxiety disorders affect 8% of children. Approximately 25% of 13 to 18-year-olds have an anxiety disorder, and 6% have severe anxiety disorder. And children who develop anxiety are 3 times more likely to also develop depression. And the reason for that is we kind of talked about how with anxiety, it's this excessive anxiety and worry that they can't control. So when you've experienced that for a prolonged period of time, it can lead to those feelings of sadness and hopelessness, which is why we see that it can also lead to feelings of depression. So they asked teenagers, what are the biggest concerns that you have? What are those things that most affect you? And we see that anxiety and depression was 70%. So that was more than bullying, drug addiction, drinking, poverty, teenage pregnancy, and gangs. So for our teenagers, they're identifying those feelings of depression and anxiety as being at the top. So that's important for us to note. So what are some signs of anxiety in children? So we're looking at things like physical symptoms, because remember we said that fight or flight mode, right? So if it's affecting us where we're less focused on our middle parts, we're going to feel those physical symptoms of that anxiety. So it may lead to things like, if you notice your child reporting a lot of stomach aches or headaches, I'm not feeling well. Sometimes that can be linked to some of those emotional symptoms. Difficulty falling or staying asleep. Avoidance of people, places, or things that they used to enjoy. So they're having a harder time getting to school. They don't want to go out with friends. They want to stay home. Things like that are important to notice. Irritability and anger. So a lot of times when we see these behavioral issues, we don't recognize that it might be due to something a little bit deeper, that it might be more emotional, it might be anxiety related. For our children, it can look like anger and irritability. They're more snappy. We might see more defiance, lack of focus, or over planning. So they need to know everything that's happening. They want to make sure that they have the whole schedule. Getting the slightest point off on a test automatically becomes their biggest concern. So they need to have everything perfectly in order, over planned, know exactly what's happening in their day. Any change in the schedule or routine tends to impact them. And then that negative thinking. So feeling badly about mistakes that they made, things that they say, they might kind of find themselves rethinking about the things that they've said, and then they're beating themselves up for it. And then it starts to really impact how they feel about themselves. So for our adolescents, we're noticing a lot of the same things, but in addition, they might have unfounded or unrealistic fears. So really afraid of something that feels larger than the scope of what's really happening in this moment. They may be feeling nervous or on edge, restless, agitated. So again, that frustration that they might be feeling, that defiance where we think it's behavioral, it may be due to that anxiety. We might notice difficulty concentrating. They may come home and say, I couldn't pay attention in class. I can't pay attention to what the teacher is saying. You might notice that they get distracted when you're trying to talk to them. They're having a really hard time focusing. Disinterested, decreased interest in things that they used to enjoy, that sense of apathy, and unexplained outbursts. So all of a sudden their reactions are much bigger than what's warranted for the situation. So with anxiety, like we said, we might be noticing some of these behaviors that we're seeing. So they might be more angry, a lack of focus, difficulty sleeping, but really they're hiding all of these emotional symptoms that are underneath. And these are the things that they have a really hard time explaining to us or telling us. So they might be feeling ashamed, disgusted, overwhelmed, have those sense of guilt, but they can't communicate that. So what we see is that anger or these behavioral concerns that are associated with anxiety. Okay, so we're going to shift gears now. We've talked a little bit about what is anxiety, how can it impact us, and how important it is that we're able to really intervene and support. So one of the strategies that's very helpful is mindfulness. Anybody here of mindfulness? Anybody practice mindfulness? Yeah, a little bit. So there's a lot of research out there about the impact of mindfulness, especially on anxiety. It can be really valuable and really helpful. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness, simplified, is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So if I'm driving home and I'm distracted, I'm kind of on autopilot, I know how to get home from work, and I find myself at home 20 minutes later, that's not being mindful. So even though I am paying attention, I didn't get into any car accidents on my way home, I didn't hit anybody, I'm not necessarily being mindful because I'm not paying attention on purpose. So paying attention on purpose would be me getting in the car. So for example, I haven't driven home from this school before. So I'm going to be paying a lot closer attention to my drive because I don't know my way. I'm not going to go on that autopilot. So that on purpose is really important when it comes to mindfulness. It's being aware of what we're paying attention to. It's being aware of what's happening in this moment. So it's not just getting myself from point A to point B, but it's doing it with intention, on purpose. And that non-judgmental part is also very important. So if I'm judging myself for the decisions I make, or for the thoughts that I'm having, or for the mistakes that I made, yeah, I'm paying attention to it, but I'm judging it. So being mindful is being able to acknowledge it, notice it without judging it. Ooh. So there's a lot of really great benefits of mindfulness for our children and for us, but just focusing on our kids for a minute. Supports readiness to learn. It promotes academic performance. So they're going to perform better in school. They're going to be more alert. They're going to be more aware. It affects emotionality. So anxiety related to test taking, anxiety in general, their ability to regulate their emotions. There's a lot of positive impact that mindfulness can have. It reduces stress levels. It makes them more aware. It makes them more present in this moment. So there's a lot of really great impact that mindfulness can have on our children. And all of these things, so promoting self-reflection, self-calming, reducing stress, reducing anxiety, that's benefits that we can get to. So it's something that can really be helpful for us as adults, and it can really support our children. And mindfulness is something that we can do together as a family. So it's not something that we can just tell our kids, here, go do this. We can do the mindfulness together as a family, and that could be a nice activity that we're doing. Or if we notice our child is getting overwhelmed, that's really great for us to say, hey, I see that you're overwhelmed. Let's sit down and do this together. And that way that they're seeing that we're in this together, that this helps you too as an adult, and that makes it a little bit more comfortable for them to try. So here's some ideas of things that we can try. So especially for our little ones, Cosmic Kids Yoga, Go Noodle, Go Zen Online are all really great places to look for some ideas. The 4-7-8 breathing is another, so Go Zen actually does a 4-7-8 breathing video that's really great. So this is a nice way to introduce our kids to mindfulness and what it is. Some things that we can do together as a family, the mindful walk is a really great one. So you go outside, go for a walk, and you're going to pay attention to the different colors that you see. So it could be as simple as that. So we're going to go outside and we're going to notice what are the different colors that I'm seeing as I'm going on this walk. Or maybe going on that mindful walk, and instead of just zoning out and putting my headphones on, I'm actually going to pay attention to what's happening around me. Notice the people that are walking in the street, notice the cars that are driving by. I'm actually going to be more present and more aware. Something as simple as drinking a glass of water, a sip of water. So in that moment, I'm tapping into my senses. Again, if I'm doing it on purpose with intention. So by allowing myself to take that sip of water and doing it purposely, I'm noticing that I'm taking that sip of water. I'm noticing that it's going down my throat, and I'm paying attention to the fact that I'm in this moment right now, and I can do that with intention. So it just gives me that second to pause. It could be as simple as like walking to the bathroom, but instead of doing it with my phone in my hand, checking emails or sending text messages, I'm actually going to keep my eyes open and notice what's happening as I'm taking that walk. Some other ideas, take 5 grounding activities, really great with kids, especially if they're feeling escalated. So it taps into our senses, and our senses are a really powerful way to connect us to the present moment. Because if I'm noticing what I'm seeing or what I'm smelling in this moment, I have to be focused on this moment. So with take 5, you're going to do 5 things that you see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. The order is not as important. I do it. It's pretty much like what's easiest to be able to call out. So things that we can see are much easier than things that we can smell and things that we can taste. So that's kind of why we do it in that order. But that doesn't really matter as much as really just kind of noticing, tapping into our senses in that moment. I don't have it on here, but another one is observe and describe. So again, tapping into our senses. So if I notice my kid is really getting into their head, they're focusing on whatever they're stressed about, we can just kind of take a second and say, all right, grab an object, any object, even something as simple as this remote. It's like, okay, describe it to me. So I could say, well, it has an odd shape. It has a circle in the middle. It feels kind of rubbery. And I'm really describing it in as much detail as I can. And then you notice when I'm describing it, what I'm focused on is this clicker in my hand. So it pulls them out of whatever's happening in their head in that moment, brings them back to this present moment so that they can have that chance to really reset and then go back to what they're doing. Another nice quick one is relax with black or visualize black. All they have to do is close their eyes. They're going to put their hands over their eyes to cover them and just focus on the black. Take a couple deep breaths, focus on the black. So what they're doing is removing all of that sensory stimulation, trying to pull themselves out of whatever's happening in their head and then bringing themselves back to this present moment. So those are just a couple of things. There's tons of stuff available online that you can watch as videos. I'm going to review a couple apps together with you in a second as well that can give you some ideas. But mindfulness is a really great tool. And I know that a lot of times we think mindfulness means I must meditate and it has to take a long time. You can see from these activities that it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It's just something where I'm bringing myself back to this present, doing it on purpose, doing it intentionally, giving myself that chance to really pause, and that can really be valuable. So we talked about how stress impacts us in our bodies. So releasing stress mindfully, depending on where I'm feeling that stress, this can be a really valuable tool. You guys are going to have this presentation, so you can always take a look back at it. But being able to stretch, take some deep belly breaths. When I teach my kids and adolescents to breathe, I'm actually telling them, put your hand on your belly, especially when you're learning to take those deep breaths, because we all tend to be very shallow breathers if we're feeling anxious. We're not taking those deep breaths. We're not really bringing that oxygen into our bodies. So if you put your hand on your belly when you're taking that deep breath, you're really noticing that your belly is going to fill up with air and then release that air as you're taking those nice deep breaths. Whereas when we're doing that shallow breathing, it's right up here in our chest. We're not really feeling it in our belly. So if we put our hand on our belly, we're really intentionally noticing that that's where we're bringing the air. All right. So these are some strategies to help our children deal with stress, deal with anxiety. So reframe the stress. So one of the things that we can do is help our children shift from that stress is bad to stress can be helpful, as long as we're doing it in a manageable way where it's like, okay, so you're feeling stressed about this test. Let's figure this out together. What's going to be helpful? Do we need to find more time to study? Do we need to find a quiet space for you to do that? Do we need to notice that you're feeling stressed in your body right now? So let's take a break from it and then come back to it. So shifting that all things are bad to, all right, let's find the positive in this. Let's find the spin. So we're not denying the negative. We're just finding a different way of looking at it. We're shifting it a little bit. Shifting from a fixed to a growth mindset. So what that means is really kind of identifying that this is not permanent, this is temporary. So what I'm feeling in this moment, our emotions are very temporary. When I teach kids about the emotions, I like to think of them as like a wave, right? Or another visualization that I like to use is the train. So if it's like a wave, you're going to notice the wave going up. So if you hold on to that emotion, you're going to see the emotion going up like a wave. And then if you allow it to go down, it'll go down like that wave and then it'll kind of fizzle out. But if I allow myself to keep thinking about that thought and keep dwelling on that thought, or it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if I'm feeling anxious about this test and then I allow myself to just focus on the test, I'm going to keep feeling more anxious about it. But if I recognize it, kind of going back to that mindfulness, taking that pause, like, yes, I'm stressed about this test. I'm going to breathe it in and then I'm going to breathe it out, give myself that pause and then figure out what do I do next? How do I problem solve this so that I can manage this situation and make something that feels really big into something that feels more manageable, more bite-sized. So that kind of ties into that stop catastrophic thinking. So in our heads, we tend to, we don't want to dismiss the worry. We want them to know that we're validating that, yeah, you're worried about this and it matters. And I hear you. And what's the worst that could happen? And once they start to really break it down, it's like, okay, well, I'll do bad on this test. All right, so you do bad on this test, then what happens? And then we kind of figure it out together. So that idea of what's the worst that could happen helps them to recognize that the worst that could happen isn't really that bad. And then we can figure out where to go next together. So that catastrophizing, it really makes us think that what's going to happen is the worst possible thing ever. We won't be able to get past this. And once we start to break it down, it's like, okay, I can do this. This is manageable. Let's figure this out together. But all of these things really kind of tie back to allowing ourselves to take that pause. So if we take that pause, take that deep breath, because remember, when we're stressed, when we're feeling anxious, our body is not focusing on the inner parts of our body. And so if the oxygen is not really filtering up to our frontal lobes, we're not thinking as clearly. So we want to take that pause, take that deep breath so that we can really manage the situation in a way that feels doable, as opposed to something that feels too overwhelming. Practice problem solving together. So brainstorm solutions. You hear me talking a lot about that. Like, let's take that pause, not catastrophize it, and then figure out how do we solve it together. So that problem solving, think through the consequences, both positive and negative, and then pick the choice that's going to work best for you. So that takes a big problem and it makes it feel more manageable. And then we talked about practicing the stress management techniques, those mindfulness techniques. So things like taking a deep breath, stretching, listening to music, doing some mindfulness, those can all be very helpful. Right. So sometimes we simply just need to listen and hear them tell us what's happening or what's wrong with them. It's when they feel, I hear a lot of, even my own kids. So my own kids, my adolescents that I work with, kids that I work with, a lot of the times they're like, well, mommy and daddy are stressed. So I'm scared to tell them what I'm feeling because I don't want to stress them out even more. So sometimes it's just allowing them to know that, hey, I'm here, I can handle it. I can be that safe space, I can handle it. It's all right, I got this. And I might feel stressed and I might feel sad and I might cry, but that doesn't mean I can't handle it. I'm strong enough to handle this. So sometimes it's about just like allowing them to know I can be that safe place. I can take this, I can handle this, I can hold this with you. We can carry this together. Reassuring them often, encouraging them that it's okay to share. And then, we talked about those maladaptive, irritable outbursts and things that we might be seeing that are linked to that anxiety. So allowing them to know that we still love them and we still care about them despite those behaviors that we might see. Doesn't mean that we want to see those behaviors. It just letting our kids know that I'm still here and I still love you regardless of what's happening or regardless of what these behaviors are. And if we're able to connect that these behaviors are actually those underlying things to some of the emotional experiences that they're having, then it allows us to look at it with a little bit of a different frame. I can observe it a little bit differently. So I'm not going to go into the nurture heart approach too much, but I just wanted to really briefly talk about that because I think that's another really valuable tool for being able to support our students, especially with some of those big behaviors or behaviors that we're seeing at home. If they're being disruptive, if they're not listening, if they're non-compliant, then this is something that can be a really valuable tool. So the nurtured heart approach has 3 stands. So it's absolutely no, absolutely yes, and absolutely clear. So what does that mean? Absolutely no means shifting our focus, shifting our energy from focusing on their bad behaviors. So an example, I asked my kid to take out the garbage and they get up and they're mumbling something under their breath. I know they're cursing at me, but they take the garbage and they take it outside. So in that moment, I have a choice. What am I going to focus on? Absolutely no is saying, I'm not going to give my energy to that negative behavior. So as hard as it can be sometimes in that moment, instead of saying, hey, why did you just curse at me? Or what did you say under your breath? I'm going to shift my focus to the absolutely yes, which is really focusing on the positive behavior. So what's that positive behavior in that moment? What did they do? They took out the garbage. Yeah. And that can be really surprising and really shocking for adolescents when we shift our focus. And it's like, I'm not going to call you out on cursing me out. I'm going to call you out on the fact that you took out the garbage. And that's what I'm going to really focus on, because it starts to show them that, hey, I see what you're doing. I see that you listened and I appreciate that. And I'm not going to put my energy into what you just said. I'm going to really focus on this behavior that you did. The absolutely clear is that sense of being consistent. So I'm going to have rules. I'm going to have expectations. So say my rule for cursing is that they have to put $1 in the dollar jar or the coin jar, whatever it is, whatever your rules are. That doesn't mean that we're excusing the behavior. We're just shifting our focus. So we're going to remind them of what the rules are, but we're going to shift our focus and make sure that we're acknowledging the positive behavior that we saw. And that can sometimes be a shift in terms of how we're approaching it, how we're presenting the discipline. So really letting them know, these are my rules, these are my expectations, and I'm really going to put my focus, energy, and attention into the positive behaviors that I want to see you do and want to see grow. So with nurtured heart approach, it also really focuses on these things called recognitions. So when our child does something good and I say, good job, buddy, yes, we're giving them praise, but it's very unspecific praise. So we notice that our kids, when they're getting that good job, buddy, it's like, yeah, they like it. We're not going to say that they don't like it, but it's a lot easier to slide off. So if they're thinking, no, I don't do a good job, I'm actually not smart, or I'm not really good at this, or I really sucked at this game. What do you mean? Why are you telling me I did a good job? Then it's harder for that to really stick because it's not very specific. So with the nurtured heart approach, what they're saying is that our recognitions need to be three things. They need to be truthfully appreciative, authentically acknowledging, and building inner wealth. So truthfully appreciative means that if they did poorly on a game, I'm not going to say, you did so great at that game, because they're going to know that I didn't mean it. They're going to know that it's not the truth. So instead, I'm going to be truthfully acknowledging by really focusing on what is something that I can say that's really true. So if I see that they worked really hard, they tried really hard at the game, but they didn't do so well, then I can really focus on that. I saw you trying really hard today. I knew it wasn't easy when you lost the game, but I saw how much effort you were putting in. I saw when you got disappointed, you didn't give up. You kept going back up there and you kept trying again. And you really stuck it out. You stayed there for your team. And that shows a lot of determination. I'm so proud of that. So what we just said holds a lot more weight than, oh, you did a good job, buddy, or nice try, buddy. Because what we're saying is truthful. It's really acknowledging the fact that we see what they did and that we can build that inner wealth by linking it to the skills that I'm seeing in them. So I use the word determination, right? I see how determined you are. You didn't give up. So now they're starting to look at themselves as somebody who's determined, somebody who doesn't give up. So it really starts to help them link themselves with these strategies, or I'm sorry, not strategies, with these words that feel more positive. So instead of looking at themselves as, well, I failed, I'm not good at this, I'm a failure, they're now linking themselves with somebody who's determined, somebody who doesn't give up. So that's the idea behind the nurtured heart approach. We could whole session on this, and we won't do that today, but that's just a little snippet that I thought could be helpful based on the topic that we're doing today. So the way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice. So that's really the idea here behind building that inner wealth. The more positive words that we use to describe what we see in them, the more they're going to connect that to who they are as individuals, as opposed to really focusing on all the negativity that they're experiencing all around them. It doesn't mean that they're being put down or being judged, but a lot of times we start to internalize that and we put it on ourselves. And then we start to be our biggest critic. So when they start hearing from us that we're seeing these positive things in them, that starts to stick too, especially if we're using those recognitions, right? Because we're being truthful. We're saying things that they can't deny. We're saying things that they can't come back and say, no, that's not true, I didn't do that. Because we're being really specific with what we saw and what that shows us about them. So in the beginning, we started out with that scale of emotional intensity. So this is a nice little color zone of regulation, can be really helpful with the little ones in particular, because it allows them to link how they're feeling with colors. So just like we did it for us as adults, this can be really valuable for our kids. And you see this one has some ideas already in it for how does our body feel, but I think it's really helpful to create this with your child and have them fill it in. So when I'm at a 1 and I'm feeling relaxed, what does my body look like? How do I feel? When I'm at a 5 and I'm really stressed, or I'm really angry, or whatever emotion they want to connect to what they feel when they have their intensity, what does my body look like? So having them actually write it out so that you can see, okay, so for you, this is what a 5 looks like. For you, this is what a 1 looks like. So then when I notice that my child's exhibiting these behavioral symptoms, or their body, I see it happening, then I know I can say, okay, I see you getting elevated. Where are you? Are you at a 3 or are you at a 4? How can we respond together? And if we've already done that, where we kind of decided together, this is what my body looks like, and then even linking it to skills, like what are some skills that I can use when I'm at a 1? I'm at a 3? What are some skills that I can use when I'm at a 5? Then I'm already prepared with how to support them. So when you think about that 3 is like that yellow zone that we talked about with the scale of emotional intensity. So if I'm at a 3, if I'm in that middle zone, then that's where I'm starting to feel myself getting really revved up, but I'm still kind of in control. So things like distracting them, Like, all right, let's take a walk. Let's walk away from it. Let's take a deep breath. Those can be really helpful. If they're at that intensity of 5, so now they're really angry, sometimes some of that might not be as helpful. So thinking about ways of trying to have them release that energy in a healthy way. So it might be like, let's do 10 jumping jacks. Let's run around in a circle. Let's punch this pillow, something that's going to exert a lot of energy, because if we're at that 5, we've got a lot of this really negative pent up energy inside of our bodies that we want to find a way to release. So those are just some ideas of how can I release that intensity in a way that's going to feel healthier than punching my brother, punching a wall, hurting myself. So those are some more healthy ideas for how can I release some of that energy. But if I'm at that 5, it might not be as helpful to say, all right, take a deep breath or just calm down. I don't know about you, but calm down does not work for me. If somebody tells me to calm down when I'm feeling stressed, if I'm at a 4 or 5, it's actually gonna make me feel worse, because it makes me feel like I'm not in control. So if we know that we don't like it, then we have to be really mindful of, let's not use that with our kids. What are their trigger words? What are words that we know when they hear it, that's gonna actually make them more frustrated or more upset? So if I know that for myself, then I'm gonna be more mindful of what is something that I can say instead. So just to tap back onto Nurtured Heart for a second. So Nurtured Heart talks about that reset. So that's kind of their way of taking that pause, taking that breather, and then coming back to it. We're going to press the reset button and start fresh. But for some kids, I know that even that word reset can feel really frustrating. They don't like it. They don't want to reset for whatever reason that might feel triggering to them. So I tell families, all right, let's come up with your word together. And some families get really clever with it. One family came up with farty fart. And that was the word that they used, and that's what worked for them. It was something funny that made them all laugh, and it made them kind of pause and reset whatever was happening, and then they could keep moving forward together. So coming up with a clever way of kind of figuring out, how do I let you know that I see you're at that 5, because you told me that that's what the 5 looks like, so that we can reset together, start fresh together, and keep moving forward together. So we don't want to punish them for escalating to that intensity, because let's face it, they don't like it. I know when I get that angry, I don't like how it feels inside my body. It's not a good feeling. So if our initial thought is I have to punish you for getting that angry, then they're not going to want to work with us on problem solving it of how can they do it better. So if instead it's like, I see that you're feeling that intensity, I can see it doesn't feel good for you. Let's figure out together how to take care of you so that you're feeling like you can have more control. And so all about that control. So if they're losing control and then we punish them for it, that feels really frustrating for them in that moment. So distract with ACEs comes from the DBT model, which is the dialectic behavioral therapy. And it can just be a really nice way of being able to reset in those moments where we're feeling our intensity starting to increase. So distract with ACEs has 4 things. The activities are things that require thought and concentration. So again, this can be really helpful if I'm noticing my intensity increasing, but if I get to that 5, might not necessarily be as helpful. At that point, I'm going to want something that's going to really release a lot of my energy. But distract with ACEs. So this could be like doing a crossword puzzle or a word search, or maybe even playing a video game if it's something that they really have to focus on, something that's going to take their energy and attention away from whatever distressing thought that they're having. Contributing is focusing on someone or something other than yourself. So this might be like, hey, can you go take the laundry basket down for me? Not that you necessarily need them to do it, but just that you're trying to give them something to do that's going to help you, so that they can feel like they're supporting you in that moment and thinking outside of their own, whatever thoughts are happening for them. Or maybe if they're more like becoming dysregulated, but not really, where they can sit down and process something with you. Maybe it's like, all right, let's think about, maybe you want to text a friend and just say, hey, I really value your friendship. Where that way they're saying something to somebody that they care about, that's like making them feel good, but also it's letting them give back to somebody else and making somebody else feel good. So that can be a really clever way of like, all right, I know you're feeling stressed. Let's just think about something else. Maybe you want to call grandma. Grandma's really been wanting to talk to you. Let's just leave this stressful situation here for a minute. We're not gonna focus on this really stressful essay that you have to write. We're just gonna take a minute. Let's go call grandma. Make her really feel good to hear your voice. So something that's gonna let them think about somebody other than themselves for the moment. Emotions, do something that will create a competing emotion. So I know especially our adolescents, if they're depressed, what do you notice them listening to? Depressing music, right? Not helpful. It just makes them feel more depressed in that moment. So this is where we're trying to shift that emotion, doing something that's going to create an opposite emotion, a different type of emotion. So if I'm feeling sad, I'm going to want to maybe listen to some really upbeat dance music, or maybe even classical music, something that's different, going to create a different type of emotion for me than what I'm feeling. I know sometimes the YouTube videos can be really helpful, or they'll watch a funny TikTok, something that's going to pull their attention away from that sad emotion or that angry emotion that they're feeling, and help create a different type of emotion for them. And then lastly, sensations. Find a safe physical sensation to distract you from intense negative emotions. So this could be splashing cold water on their face, squeezing an ice cube. So this can be really helpful, especially if that intensity is high, where I'm going to try to create some other intense physical sensation to counteract the intense emotional sensation that I might be feeling. So that cold water can be helpful. Maybe getting in the shower, taking a shower as cold as you can. Something that's just going to create a different type of intensity physically, so I can pull myself away from what I'm feeling emotionally. These are just some other ideas, things that maybe you can do together. Things that they can do on their own. Sometimes it can be helpful too. So we've talked about a ton of different ideas, but really helping our kids create their own little toolbox. So what is your toolbox of coping skills that you can take with you? So if we know that they really like the sensory piece, and maybe lotion, something that's helpful for them, maybe that's something they're going to throw in their backpack that they can even take to school. So that's something that they can help use to regulate them. Maybe it's some sort of tactile thing, like a stress ball, or maybe a smooth rock, something that they're going to be able to touch and hold and feel, that's going to create some sort of emotional response for them. Or again, back to that observe and describe, or that sensory mindfulness piece, just help them focus on this present moment. Could be things like music, art, or journaling. Some kids don't want to talk about it, but maybe they'll write in a journal, or they might want to draw, or some kids get really talented and they'll create music, or they'll create the notes, they'll create the lyrics, all different sorts of ways that they're trying to express their emotions, express their feelings in a way that feels safe and that feels helpful for them. Talking it out with family or friends, again, that sense of like, I can be here, I'm strong enough, I can handle this, I can take this right now, you can come to me. Playing with a toy, taking a warm bath. We also said like taking a cold shower, that can be helpful. Sipping on tea or hot chocolate, that's a really nice one with the sensory piece again, because you're holding the warm cup, you're smelling it, and then you're feeling it as it goes down. Playing a sport or game, so something that physically gets some of their energy out. And we know that exercise also releases endorphins, which can be helpful in elevating our mood as well. Pet time, there's a lot of research that pet therapy can be really helpful. So petting a dog, petting a cat, that can feel really helpful. It can feel soothing, especially those puppies, because they know when we need their energy, and they tend to give that back to us. Laughter or half smile. So I like this one, although right now with the masks, that's not quite as helpful, but they can do it behind their mask. So it's that idea of, I don't even need to put my face into a full smile. Even if I do that half smile, what I'm actually doing is sending this message to my brain that, all right, I'm not miserable, I'm actually feeling okay. And then I start to actually create these hormones in my body that are going to shift the way I'm feeling. So it actually physiologically makes me feel better in that moment. Believe it or not, they've done research, it's true. Try it out. Cooking or baking is something that's fun to do together, and then you get the end result of being able to enjoy it together as well. So that can be a really nice family thing to do together as a way of coping. So these are some of the helpful apps. These are some of my favorites. There's a ton out there, but these are just some of my favorites. So the one in the middle, Second Floor Youth Helpline. So this is a teen helpline that you can call or you can text. There's an app that teenagers can download. It has the button right on there for them to call or text right in the app. It's manned by licensed clinicians. And they're available 24/7. So it's just a really nice way for them to have this safe, anonymous person that they can talk to if they're feeling like they need some release in that moment. The ones around the side, so the virtual hope box is a really cool to-go coping toolbox, right? So it has It has some games on there that they can use to distract them. Inspire Me lets them upload videos or pictures of people that are going to make them feel good or things that are going to make them happy. There's Inspire, I don't remember what they're actually called, but there's one where it lists out different positive quotes that they can look at. It allows them to link it directly to phone numbers. So who are the people that I can call? That way I don't have to think about it or search. I'm going to open my app. Everything I need is right in there. So it's a really great one that I love. Dailyo and the My Life meditation, both of them, what they do is they allow you to do a check-in. So I can check in, I can say how I'm feeling today. The My Life meditation allows you to do a physical check-in. So like, how am I feeling physically? And then how am I feeling emotionally? And then it actually then pulls up like 2 or 3 different mindfulness activities that I can do that are going to match how I'm feeling that day. Dailyo doesn't do that, but it's more like a journal. So they can document in there, they could say how they're feeling, and then it tracks it over time. So then we can start to see, all right, so we're noticing that your mood's been pretty low for a couple of days in a row now. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out what we can do to support you. So that's a nice little app for helping them kind of regulate and help them kind of notice what they're feeling. And then Headspace is a really great one for meditation, for mindfulness. It has some really helpful things in there as well. But again, there's a ton of stuff out there. These are just some of my favorites that I tend to recommend a lot. All right, so we've talked a lot about how to support our kids, but it's so important before we even try to support our kids that we figure out how to support ourselves. Because if we're noticing that we're waking up and we're already at that 4 or 5, we're noticing that every day feels really stressful and really challenging, and I wake up and I'm like, I don't even feel rested. It's so important that we do that check-in with ourselves. So self-care, I know sometimes it feels like a luxury. It's really a necessity. If I'm not able to take care of myself, then I don't have the energy to really support and take care of my children. So being able to do those checks, I started by asking you, how are you feeling today? And then figuring out where's our intensity at. And notice if it kind of shifts throughout the day. You know, if we're working throughout the day, by the time we get home, where's our intensity at? What are we feeling? I know last week, Dr. Moore also talked, or not last week, last session, Dr. Moore also talked about that energy check. So figuring out, where am I at? What am I feeling? Where's my energy at? Do I have enough energy? Do I have low enough intensity when I get home that I'm able to support my kids? And if I don't, what do I need to do to take care of me so that I can be more present? Because they feel it. They know when it feels safe and when it doesn't feel safe. They know when you're feeling too overwhelmed. And that's what I hear a lot. Like, I can't talk to mom about it. I can't talk to dad about it. They've just got so much on the plate. And you do, you absolutely do. And your kids feel it. So how can we make sure that we're showing them, hey, yeah, you're right. It is a lot. I know it's a lot for you and it's a lot for me. And we can both regulate together. Let's figure out together what are some strategies that we can both use so that we can be more available for each other. So these are just some small but powerful ideas, things that we can do to take care of ourselves, find a funny way to smile or laugh. So just like we said with our kids, thinking about what's going to be helpful for us. Maybe you have a favorite podcast that you want to listen to on your way home, or maybe you choose to be mindful on your way home and you're actually going to pay attention to your drive. Getting some fresh air, so going out for that walk, that's something that we can do together. So it's not something that I have to take time away from my children to do. It's something that we could do together. We're both getting outside, we're both getting that fresh air. Notice the good in the midst of the not so good. So finding something that we can be grateful for. So waking up, even if we wake up and just list 3 things that we're grateful for every morning, just shifts the way that we perceive our day, shifts our focus for that day, and allows us to see, all right, so yeah, things are really hard right now. And I'm really grateful that we have this house to live in and that my kids are safe and that we're all together. It could be something as simple as that. Sometimes we need to kind of notice when what we're seeing in social media or on the news is actually creating more intensity for me and for my body. And if I notice that, it's okay to say, all right, I need a break from that. I need to turn it off. So I try to actually avoid the news and I get my information from other places because I notice that that's just everything that I'm dealing with in real life. Sometimes it's like, that's just too much intensity where I need to figure out another way to get that information in a healthy way so that I can be more present and focused in what I need to do. But figuring out for yourself what's going to feel most helpful. So modeling, for our kids that it's okay to take breaths, modeling for our kids that, yes, this is hard for me too. And yes, sometimes my intensity is going to be high. I'm really big on deep breathing and my son sees it. So he'll notice if I get frustrated, I'm like, all right, I close my eyes and I count to 3 and I take 3 deep breaths because I want him to know that I get escalated too. I mean, second grade homework, man. You'd think we could both handle it, but some days. So sometimes I get frustrated and I know that he sees it. So for me to ignore it or pretend that it's not happening wouldn't be healthy for him, because then he would think, okay, then I have to ignore it or pretend it's not happening. And I'm going to just fly off the handle because that's what I'm supposed to do. So by taking that pause and saying, it's okay. Yeah, I get frustrated too. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to take those 3 deep breaths. All right, buddy, mommy just reset. Let's try this again together. And that way it starts to let them know it's okay. We're both allowed to get frustrated. It's a normal emotion. It's how we handle that frustration that really matters. Don't compare yourself to others or judge yourself. This can be really hard, especially sometimes we notice that other people are really kind of talking about and acknowledging all of the positive and wonderful things that they're doing. And it's like, oh, well, I don't do that. Well, of course, that's what they're going to highlight, but you have a lot of positive things going for you and your family. And how can we focus on that? Especially with the pandemic, I'm sure you guys have seen that image of like, we're all in the same storm, but we're on different boats. It's so true. So my experience is completely different from your experience. So even though we went through this almost 2-year pandemic together, we had completely different experiences. So we both struggled, but in different ways. So if I try to compare my experience to yours, then we're both losing out really. So instead, I'm just going to focus on what do I need to do to take care of me? And when I have the energy, then what do I do to take care of you? Knowing when to seek help. So just like we were saying with our kids, they're feeling more anxiety. We might be feeling more anxiety too. Do I meet some of those criteria? Do I find myself really struggling to identify strategies that work for me? Would it be helpful for me to have that space to really process? And do I have my own outlets? Maybe it's going to the gym. Maybe it's considering therapy. What are some things that are going to work for me so I can take care of me and show my kids that it's okay. It's okay to take care of ourselves. I want you to be able to do that too. Get some sleep. I know, especially when you have kids, sometimes it's like night times when you get everything done. Sacrificing sleep doesn't help anybody. Instead, you wake up feeling depleted in the morning. Trying to get up before our kids do can be so helpful, so hard, especially if we've been up really late. But it gives us those few minutes to just be able to get amped up and ready for the day before they join us. Sometimes that doesn't work with our 3-year-old waking us up at 5 a.m., but when we can, it can be really helpful. So we talked about mindfulness and its benefits for our kids. So these are some ways that we can also incorporate mindfulness in just really simple ways. So the first one says arrive. This is a really simple thing where it's just like the act of like intentionally being present. So if I get in my car and I drive to work, before I get out of the car, I'm just going to say to myself, okay, I'm at work, I've arrived, I'm here, I'm ready to be at work. And then I get out of the car. And then when I go home, I do the same thing. Because imagine you had a tough day at work, you get in the car, you drive home, you're processing that day, you get out of the car, you're still processing that day, and now your kids come up to you and they're ready to have your energy, and you're still thinking about all the stuff that happened at work that's still stressing you out. So that idea is just take that pause in the car, take a deep breath, and it's like, I arrived, I'm at home, I'm ready to be present, and then getting out of the car. So it's just taking that second to say, all right, I'm going to reset, start fresh, I'm in a different place. Work might have been tough today, but I'm going to press the pause button on work and worry about that tomorrow. Take 5, same as we'd said with our kids, that ability to just kind of use my senses. It might be even that you're not using all 5 senses, and that's okay. Like for some people, some senses are more powerful than others. So I mentioned smell because that tends to be a pretty powerful one for people. Some people like those essential oils, or lotion is such a simple one. You could put some lotion on your hand. Something that's going to tap into your senses and allow you to focus on this present moment. We mentioned that. Mindful walk we talked about, that mindful bite. I say mindful bite, not mindful eating, because nobody has time to eat a whole mindful meal. But we can take one bite, and that one bite, we're going to really savor it. We're going to notice what we're eating. I know we've all had moments where it's like, I had lunch and I have no idea what I just ate. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm done with lunch. I got to do the next thing. And it's like this rush, 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 where we're not able to really just be present and savor and enjoy this moment. So just taking that one mindful bite, we're going to really acknowledge, be present, notice what we're eating, allow ourselves to just appreciate this moment, and then move on to the next thing. Focusing on the breath. So I mentioned that that's something I do. So I close my eyes. I really just focus on my breath. It's going in and then it's going out. Putting your hand on your belly can really help with that, because then you notice the air filling up your belly and then releasing. Doing with intention. So like we said, it's not just enough to be present enough to not get into a car accident on our way home. It's that idea of being present and doing it on purpose. And that could be anything. So even our chores that we really hate doing, it's like, I'm going to wash my dishes with intention. I'm going to be present and I'm going to not enjoy it, but I'm going to allow myself to know that this is something I'm doing. And I appreciate the fact that I had food and dishes enough to be able to feed my family. It's just kind of shifting our perspective just a little bit, not denying the fact that we hate this chore, but like I can intentionally do this and recognize that there's still something to be grateful for in this moment. The 5-finger visual imagery activity. This is one of my favorites too. So you're touching your thumb to each of your different fingers and you're going to focus on something that gives you a positive emotion. So it could be something like your favorite meal. It could be your favorite place. So for me, it's the beach. So I think of like being on the beach, my feet in the sand, and I allow myself to really think about that. It could be healthy fatigue. So like I just went for a jog and I'm going to notice what my body feels like in this moment. A warm embrace. What I can actually do is add a little bit more detail to that one before we send it out to you guys so that I can give you some ideas. But it's really just kind of closing my eyes and using my imagery. So I'm going to imagine these different places, these different experiences that are going to give me some of those positive emotions. This is something that can be helpful for kids too. I use it with kids all the time as well. Oh, good. We're gonna time. Almost anything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So just allowing ourselves to take that pause, unplug, get energized, and then plug back in. And that way we're ready and we're present to go on to the next thing that we need to do. So just some considerations, just to kind of summarize. So monitoring our own stress levels, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, being aware of our child's behaviors and emotions. So if we notice changes in our kids' behaviors, if we notice changes in the things that they enjoy doing, just kind of asking a little bit more about that, being able to acknowledge, hey, I'm noticing this change, let's talk about it. Building a trusting relationship with our child, letting them know that I can handle it. I'm somebody that can handle whatever you're bringing to me. I'm strong enough to do this. It's okay. Even if I'm stressed, I got this. Encouraging the expression of feelings. So just like I mentioned with when I get frustrated, I don't try to hide that from him. I'm just showing him what are ways that I can handle this frustration in a healthy way so that it feels okay for him to do that as well. Teaching and modeling good emotional responses. Encouraging your child to tell you if she feels overwhelmed. So it's okay to feel overwhelmed, and we're going to validate that for them. So that sense of not trying to tell them that what they're experiencing doesn't matter, or it's not that important, or it's not that big of a deal, but acknowledging, yeah, I see that this feels really big for you. This feels really challenging for you. Let's figure out together, how can we take that pause and then work on this together so that they feel like their emotions matter and that they're allowed to feel them. Reminding your child of his or her ability to get through tough times, particularly with the love and support of family and friends. So just letting them know that we're going to get through this together, that yes, this is hard for both of us, for all of us, for our whole family, and we will get through this together. If you think about it, our track record for getting through hard things in the past is 100%. We're all still here. We're all still moving forward. So that's just a nice way of being able to reframe it. Like, yes, this is hard and we got this together. Together as a family, we're going to get through this. Monitoring what our kids watch, monitoring what we watch, monitoring the games that they play, noticing if there's something that's got a lot of violence, a lot of negativity, especially if we notice that it's impacting them. Using encouragement, natural consequences when poor decisions are made. So sometimes our kids are going to make bad choices, and we're not going to try to, oh, I must have touched something. My hair, that's my hair. We're not going to try to fix it for them every single time. We want them to acknowledge, okay, so you were unkind to your friend and now they're mad at you. So let's figure out how are we going to fix this together. You got a bad grade. I'm not going to email your teacher and say, change their grade. You have to deal with that consequence. So let's figure out together, what are you going to do next time? So sometimes it's okay for them to feel that disappointment. In fact, it's actually really healthy for them to sit with that distress, to feel that distress, because then they know how to handle it. Distressing situations are going to happen and we're going to feel them. And if we can't tolerate that, that's when we get really elevated and we feel like we lose control in hard situations. So dealing with that distress, figuring out how am I going to cope with it, can actually be really healthy. And then seeking the assistance of a school counselor, a therapist, a physician, especially if you continue to be concerned about your child's stress level. So at many times throughout their lives, children will feel like the world has turned topsy-turvy. It's not the ever-present smile that will help them feel secure. It's knowing that love can hold many feelings, including sadness, and that they can count on the people they love to be with them until the world turns right side up again. So I just wanted to end with that. It's been a hard couple of years, and for us to not acknowledge the fact that we have survived it would be really unfair to what the experience has been for us. And of course, our kids are feeling that, and we're still in it. We're still continuing to move forward in it. So being able to acknowledge that, yeah, this is hard. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of feelings associated with it. And let's hold all these feelings together because they're valid and they're okay. And let's figure out how to support you together. This is just some resources if you do need extra support. I mentioned school counselor, absolutely reach out to the school if you need extra support. These are just some other community resources. So New Jersey Mental Health Cares has a hotline that you can reach out to. Children's Mobile Response, if you're feeling like your child is in crisis in that moment and you want somebody to come out to the home to be able to support you and your child. Of course, if that crisis is elevated where you feel like you need immediate support for safety reasons, you're going to want to take them to the emergency room. So those are just some resources. Crisis text line that you can text to find out about resources available in your community. I mentioned the second floor. Mom to Mom is a resource that's available through Rutgers, where it's a peer support hotline for moms. So you're going to be able to talk to another mom who maybe has a shared experience, and that can be really helpful. And then UBHC, the screening center, if you do feel like your child's at risk, then that's somewhere that you can go as well. Ooh. Well, I appreciate your time, and I guess we'll open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
So Dr. Millard, thank you so much. I think you
Yeah.
did a wonderful job, giving the definition between stress and anxiety too, because that can sometimes get very dicey and mixed up. And when we're dealing with it here at school and when you're
Sure.
dealing with it at home. And all the tools, I mean, a tremendous amount of tools that I think every parent here has walked away with that they can try to implement at home. So I do want to open up the floor. We do have some opportunity for open question with Dr. Millar. If you do not feel comfortable doing it out loud, she'll be sticking around after the presentation, but is there anybody who would like to make a comment? Hold on, we're going to hand off the mic only because then the question, I do, but.
Thank you so much. The presentation was really wonderful. Plenty of takeaways to take home. I'm also a teacher. What I find is that in school, the behaviors are really muted. So my students who maybe at one point would have exhibited anxiety, in a way that was really visible, are now really shut down.
Sure.
They're still going through the motions. They're still showing up every day. They're still trying their best. But there's that apathy that you mentioned, I think, and even at really, really young levels, kindergarten, first grade. How, as a teacher, I guess, how do you deal with that in the moment? So, you try to be encouraging, you try to find that one thing that they did really well. Here's a star. I have a colleague that even gives kids candy. And I was like, so sacrilegious. But I think that's as a teacher, I think that's where I'm struggling the most. How do I take those kids and pull them out of that funk?
Sure. I think the first step is really just kind of validating that for them, that I see that this has been a lot for you, and I know that you're feeling overwhelmed. What do you think might feel helpful? So that way we're bringing them into that dialogue like, what can I do to support you in class? What can I do to help make this feel a little bit easier for you? So sometimes it's just them knowing that like you see it and you get it, and that it's okay for them to feel overwhelmed in this moment. So that apathy we talked about, that tends to happen after like, so you mentioned these kids that have been anxious in the past, you've seen those anxious behaviors and now it's looking like apathy. It's like, I've been dealing with this for so long that I start to tend to feel a little bit hopeless about it. Like, what's the point? What's the point of even being anxious about it? It's like, it's almost like this sense of now I'm just giving up. So that validation of like, I see you, I know that this is really hard. What can I do to support you? Sometimes, especially with the younger ones that like do something for somebody else. So it can be helpful to, when possible, like, hey, can you help me pass these out? So that they start to feel like they are important and that they matter. And it kind of pulls them out of whatever it is they're doing or they're feeling or thinking in that moment. Like, let me ask them to do something that's going to help somebody outside of themselves. Maybe they're the ones that you send to go to the to office to drop off attendance or something like that, where it's like, I know that you're kind of in this funk, so let's figure out how are we going to engage you together? How can I help you feel like you are important and that you matter in this class? And then, you know, if you're really noticing that shift, that change, letting their counselor know, like, hey, I've really noticed that a shift. Sometimes something might have changed or something might be happening at home that mom and dad can shed some insight and awareness. I was working with a student, he came into school and he was just really shut down that day. He'd already been struggling, but that day he just kind of didn't want to talk to anybody. He didn't want to even put his head up. And then once we finally talked, it was like, well, I had to spread my grandfather's ashes over the weekend. And that was just really emotional for me. But he wasn't able to share that. So instead, what we saw was him just really shutting down and not really being able to be present. Like you said, more apathetic than he typically was when he was already struggling. So sometimes it's, let me reach out, let me see if something else is going on that might be contributing to that shift in behavior. Maybe there's a change in family dynamics. Maybe somebody new is living in the house. Maybe somebody just left. That can sometimes feel helpful. But I'd be happy to provide you some other strategies offline as well that could be helpful within the classroom. But I think if we start with validating, letting them know that we see it, that we understand that they're feeling that way, bringing them into the conversation we can of like, how can I help you? What do you think would be helpful? Sometimes you kind of create that code with the kid. Like if I see that you're distracted or that you're really kind of in your own head, what can I do or what can I say that's going to help bring you back? What can I do or say that's going to help you re-engage with me so that you can be present? And then if we can, that contributing to somebody else, having them do something that's going to help you as the teacher or their whole class, something that makes them feel like they're important, that they matter, can sometimes be helpful as well. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Do I have anyone else?
Thank you very much for the presentation. How do you handle the changes that keep coming up with the mask mandate and this and every day for us and for the students? You see, well, it's this way. No, it's this way. And I think the apathy is coming. Well, no one knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And the routine just for us, for them is just not there. And how do we deal with this on a massive or a macro scale?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I think just being honest with them at that level, like, I remember in March when things first shut down, right? And we were like, okay, well, I think we're going back to school, but we're not sure. So really what we were doing with our kids is just being honest. Like, I really don't know what's going to happen, and not knowing can feel really overwhelming, right? I know it feels overwhelming for me as an adult that there's constant changes. We're not sure what's going to happen next. We're not sure what January is going to bring. So just being able to, at their level, at their age level, just being as honest as we can that I know there's constant changes and that feels really overwhelming, and kids we know need routines and they need structure, and it sometimes feels like we don't know how to give them that. So thinking about where can I create that for you? What are some structures or new routines that are the same or that we can create together so that it's something that we can still look forward to and still feel like there's some consistency that we're feeling. So I know when things kind of shut down for us, it was like, okay, Friday nights, we're going to go for a family walk. No matter what changes in the world, we can do that. That still is something that we're allowed to do. And regardless of whatever else changes, we can go up the street in our block and we can come back and for the most part, nobody told us not to do that. So thinking about how can I still create that structure? How can I let you know, again, that validation of like, yeah, this is so hard. It's hard for me too. I never know when do I have to wear a mask? When do I not? Things might change again tomorrow. We don't know. And it is frustrating and it's overwhelming, and validating that, yeah, I see that. I'm feeling that way too. I know it sucks. I'll say that to them. Like, I know it sucks. It does. You know, they used to love coming to our offices and have snacks. They can't do that anymore. So it's like little things that they got used to that are now shifting. And it's like acknowledging, yeah, this is really hard. And then thinking about how can I still create some structure, some consistency, some routine, so you have something that you can count on. And I think as adults, you know, really stepped up. Like, parents have been able to really adopt some really awesome ways of making sure that their kids still feel that structure and routine at home. Teachers have done such an incredible job of that in the classroom, shifting from virtual to in-person and back and forth. And it was a lot. So I think any way that we can still have something where it's like, okay, this is staying the same. And then if it doesn't, all right, let's shift gears. All right, so that, yeah, I know I told you that this was staying the same and now it's not. And I know that's frustrating and it's hard. So let's come up with some other way that we're still going to have that structure and routine for ourselves.
And the same thing, you have a parent that one family does not want any other their children over, and my son wants to go see his friends and not allowed to go there, and there's no continuity with everybody saying,
Yeah.
okay, let's get together on. In the same token, how do I as a parent say it's okay, I'm stressed? I don't want them to say, oh my gosh, my father is not able to handle this. How can I handle it? And I try to just, hey, just do routine. We try to do this thing and go through that. Is that the way to handle
Yeah,
it?
that's perfect. Because if you pretended that you weren't stressed, then they would think that they're not allowed to be stressed, right? So by you saying, yeah, I'm stressed too, and hey, this is the ways that I handle it, then it just makes it okay. All right, well, dad feels stressed and dad's managing everything for us. So it must be okay for me to feel stressed. And this is what dad does. So let me think about what I can do. It validates them in such a powerful way. It's so important. Don't hide the fact that you're stressed from them. We don't want them to see all of it, but we want them to know, yeah, I'm stressed too. And these are the ways that I'm trying to manage it. It just makes it feel so much more okay for them. So yes, good for you. Definitely keep doing that.
Anyone else? Dr. Miller, I actually have a question. You know, we're going to be coming up over the next couple of months on a time of the year that is very emotionally driven. We have holidays coming up and those type of things. And as you mentioned before in your presentation, everybody was on their own boat these last 2 years. So we don't know what anyone's one journey was. Do you have any helpful hints for our parents in the audience who, you know, sometimes grandparents may have passed, relatives have passed, and now that we're working toward normalcy and doing the holidays again with multiple people in the house, to, you know, help their kids in having good discussions either proactively or reactively? You got her mic on, Altia?
Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. That's a great question. So one site that I would definitely recommend you check out is Good Grief. Good Grief really kind of pulled together some really incredible resources for families. They have little books and packets for young kids too that help them understand and how to cope with grief. I think, again, that sense of like validating and acknowledging, yeah, it's going to be hard having Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever holiday that we celebrate.
For this, just make sure yours is on.
I don't want to stand in front of that. Can you hear me now? Yeah. That it's going to be hard. It's going to feel different. It might be hard. Sometimes creating like a tradition around what are we going to do to still honor or acknowledge our loved ones and the ones that we've lost, or maybe the losses that grandma used to come, but grandma can't travel right now because of everything that's happening. So we're still feeling that distance and we're feeling that loss of not being able to celebrate together. So Good Grief is an incredible place with tons of resources that can be really helpful. They actually have really great support groups for the parents, for the kids. They have a lot of really great resources that they offer. And then just kind of thinking together as a family of what's something that we can still do to acknowledge, to honor, to still include our loved ones that we may have lost so that we can feel like we're creating our own little tradition during this time. Any other?
So I'd just like to give Dr. Millar a round of applause and thank her for coming out tonight. In addition, I'm very appreciative to everyone who's here in the audience as we continue to work toward normalcy and having the discussion around mental health and making that a normal conversation in our houses. I'm ecstatic that we have more than 5 people in the audience. We have a good, 15 people in the audience, and that's wonderful to see. Hopefully, we're going to take a little break from our mental health presentations. We're going to reconvene after the holiday season in January. Our topic is going to be stress management for parents in 2022. How to re-regulate yourself. So there will be information coming out with that probably late December, early January. So we're hoping to see everybody that's here. Please bring another friend. And once again, thank you for coming out here tonight. And thank you, Dr. Millar, for a wonderful presentation.